to talk to you guys a little bit about the biology of adversity. And there's going to be some science in here, and there's going to be a test at the end, an essay test. No, I'm just joking. No. I'm talking a little bit about science, but what I'm going to do is, I do a little detailed science just to let you know that, like, we know what the research is, right? But then I'll summarize it, because the more important piece is not what the actual science is, it's how we use it. It's how we apply it, right? So it all comes down to our body's biological stress response, our fight or flight system. And it works a little something like this. Imagine you're walking in the forest and you see this guy, right? What happens? Immediately, your amygdala, your brain's fear response system, sounds the alarm, right? And it sends a signal to your brain, sends a signal to your adrenal glands sitting on top of your kidneys, saying, release stress hormones. So you release adrenaline and cortisol, and your heart starts to pound. Your pupils dilate, your airways open up. You shunt blood to your large muscles for running and jumping, and away from that itty-bitty muscle that holds your bladder closed, so you may pee your pants, but no judgment, okay? So you are ready to fight this bear. But if you were to think about it, fighting a bear wouldn't seem like a good idea, would it? No, look at him. He's big, he's got teeth, he's got claws. And that's why your amygdala, your fear response, when it gets activated, it sends signals up here to the part of your brain. It's the prefrontal cortex. It's responsible for judgment, impulse control, executive functioning, and it turns it way, way down. Because if you're in a forest and there's a bear, the last thing you want is impulse control getting in the way of survival, right? And instead what it does is it turns up a part of the brain called the noradrenergic nucleus of the locus ceruleus. Or as I like to call it, the part of the brain responsible for, I don't know karate, but I do know crazy, right? This is the within the brain stress response center, and it's responsible for getting us amped up. Now, the less obvious thing that happens when you activate your stress response is that it also activates your immune response, right? Because if that bear gets his claws into you, you want your immune system to be primed, to bring inflammation, to stabilize that wound so that you can live long enough to either beat that bear or get away. It's brilliant. It was evolved over millennia to save our lives from a mortal threat. And in fact, the creatures that did not evolve this system, well, they didn't live to reproduce, right? But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this biological response is activated over and over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. And this biological response is present in all of us, right? Kids, adults, everyone. But kids are especially sensitive to the repeated activation of our biological stress response because their brains and bodies are just developing, right? So when you have this repeated activation of the stress response, it can actually turn into a prolonged activation, which as children's brains and bodies are developing in that setting, right, that it increases the risk for these long-term health challenges. So what we see is changes in the structure and function of children's developing brains, their immune system, their hormonal system. This is what we call neuroendocrine, and even the way their DNA is read and transcribed, right? So changes in all of these things to be wired to adapt to stressful environments. And this prolonged activation of the stress response is what doctors now call the toxic stress response, right? So if you ever heard the term toxic stress, this is what we're referring to, this prolonged activation of the biological stress response. So what does it do? All right, here's the super heavy science slide, but you don't have to know any of it. Right, so what do we see? We see changes in the stress response system, right? Overactivation of the amygdala. And I just put this up there to pause on one thing. One of these lines in there somewhere, it says VTA and reward processing dysregulation. What's the VTA? The VTA is the ventral tegmental area, which works with the nucleus accumbens. It's the pleasure and reward center of the brain. It's the part of the brain that's activated by cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, alcohol, tobacco, all of our substances of dependence. That's where they act. And so when you have high doses of adversity, there are literally changes to the structure and function of this part of the brain that predispose to substance dependence. So when people say, right, oh, so-and-so, you know, they're struggling, they're down on their luck, well, it's their own fault because they were using those substances, it is critical for us to understand that their risk of becoming dependent on those substances is profoundly impacted by what they have experienced in their early life. And when you've experienced that and then you have to go and try to hold down a job, the same investigators that did the original ACE study for the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, they looked at ACEs and worker performance. And no surprise, there was a same dose-response relationship between ACEs and job-related problems, financial problems, absenteeism, right? But here is where the science comes in. I'm here to tell you all today that ACEs are not destiny. But real change, thank you, real change require systems that address the root causes. If you've got a problem, right, as a physician, if I'm treating a patient and I'm just treating the symptoms, that patient is never gonna get better. So I gotta figure out what is the root cause and how do we address the root cause to be able to really provide long-term solutions.